What if the thing you do every night, the thing you've been told is natural, essential, biologically hardwired into your very cells? What if that thing is one of the youngest habits our species has ever practiced? What if the 8-hour sleep, that unbroken block of unconsciousness that modern medicine prescribes and modern anxiety punishes you for failing to achieve, is not ancient wisdom at all, but a story written by factory whistles and gas lamps and the economic machinery of a world that needed bodies synchronized to the clock rather than to the sky. There is a different architecture buried inside the night, an older one, and the evidence for it is everywhere. If you know how to look, it's in the dusty court records of medieval England, in the prayer books of 14th century France, in the medical treatises of physicians who wrote matter-of-factly about the interval between first sleep and second sleep, as though everyone already understood what they meant. It's in the wrist-worn monitors of researchers who travelled to Tanzania and Bolivia to watch people sleep in firelight, tracking the actual rhythms of bodies that have never heard an alarm clock. It's in the architecture of your own nervous system, in the strange calm that sometimes settles over you when you wake at 2 in the morning and find yourself not anxious, not broken, but quietly, unexpectedly awake. Tonight, we're going to follow that evidence down into the archive. We're going to recover something that was taken from us, not violently, not conspiratorially, but gradually, economically, through the slow pressure of a world that valued synchronized schedules over biological truth. We're going to understand how humans actually slept for 300,000 years, what they did in the darkness between their 2 periods of rest, and why the 8-hour myth replaced all of it. And perhaps, somewhere in that recovery, we'll find something useful, something that makes the night feel less like a problem to be solved and more like a territory to be inhabited. Before we go further, if you find yourself drawn to the kind of history that hides in plain sight, the kind that changes how you understand your own body and your own nights, consider subscribing to the channel. And if you're listening right now in the dark somewhere, drop a comment telling me where you are and what time it is. There's something quietly remarkable about knowing that this story about sleep is being heard by people in different time zones, different climates, different kinds of darkness. All of us, for a few minutes, sharing the same night. Now, let's ease in. Let's go back. Not just a few centuries, but much further, all the way back to the beginning of what it means to be human and to need rest. Imagine a night without electricity. Not the diluted darkness of a modern suburb where the sky glows orange from the city beyond the hills. Not the manageable dark of a power outage that you know will end by morning, but genuine, absolute, almost physical darkness. The kind that existed for the overwhelming majority of human history. The kind where you cannot see your hand in front of your face. The kind where the stars are not romantic background decoration, but navigational tools, temporal markers, the only clock available. In that darkness, for 300,000 years, human beings lay down and slept. And the way they slept was nothing like the way you've been told you should. Imagine the weight of that darkness pressing in from every direction. The fire at the center of the group casting its small circle of amber warmth against the vast surrounding black. The sounds of the night coming in close and then receding. The breathing of the people sleeping nearby. the occasional shift of someone turning, the crackle of wood settling into embers. This was the container of human sleep for nearly the entire duration of our existence as a species. Not a bedroom with blackout curtains and a white noise machine. Not a mattress engineered for spinal alignment. A patch of ground, a fire, a group of people, and the darkness pressing in from all sides. And within that container, something happened that we have largely forgotten. Something the body still remembers even when the mind does not. The best evidence we have for how our ancestors actually rested comes from researchers who made a remarkable decision. Rather than speculating about ancient sleep patterns from evolutionary theory alone, they went and found people still living without artificial light, still organizing their nights around fire and moonlight and the cooling of the air after sunset. They went to the Hadza in Tanzania, one of the last remaining hunter-gatherer communities on Earth, people whose way of life has remained largely continuous with the deep human past. They went to the San people of Namibia, to the Tsinana in the Bolivian Amazon, and they strapped actigraphy monitors to wrists, small devices that track movement and stillness, and they simply watched what happened when human beings slept the way human beings slept for most of our existence. What they found surprised almost everyone. These people, living without smartphones or Netflix or any of the distractions we blame for our own fractured sleep, slept an average of about 6.5 hours a night. Not 10, not 12. 6.4 hours, with individual nights ranging from about 5.5 to just over 7. They fell asleep roughly 3 hours after sunset. Not immediately when darkness fell, not at the moment the fire was lit, but after a period of social time in the dimming light, conversation and quiet activity before the body finally surrendered. And they woke, on average, about an hour before sunrise. The social time before sleep is worth pausing on because it tells us something important. These communities did not simply stop moving and immediately lose consciousness when the sun went down. They gathered, they talked, they tended the fire together. There was a transitional period, a threshold between the day and the night, a collective easing into rest that was woven into the social fabric of the group. Sleep was not a private, individual event that happened behind closed doors. It was a shared passage, entered together, the group moving toward unconsciousness in a gradual, communal way that mirrored the gradual fading of the light. The isolation of modern sleep, each person sealed in their own room, their own darkness, their own relationship to the night, is itself a kind of historical anomaly. For most of human existence, sleep was something you did together. But here is the detail that changes everything, the detail that rewrites the story we've been telling ourselves about what natural sleep looks like. The variable that most strongly predicted when these people fell asleep and when they woke was not darkness, it was temperature. The bodies in these communities tended to drift towards sleep as the air cooled after sunset, and to wake as the temperature reached its coldest point in the hours before dawn. Not because they were cold, not because discomfort roused them, but because the thermal environment was directly regulating their biology. The circadian clock, the internal timekeeper we all carry, was being synchronized not by alarm bells or work schedules, but by the ancient signal of cooling air, the same signal it had been receiving for hundreds of thousands of years. Modern climate-controlled bedrooms have erased that signal entirely. We sleep in rooms held at a constant temperature, winter and summer, night and day, and we wonder why our bodies seem confused about when to sleep and when to wake. The confusion, it turns out, is entirely understandable. We've removed one of the primary environmental cues that evolution spent 300 millennia calibrating us to receive. The body is still listening for the temperature drop that signals it is time to sleep. It is still waiting for the pre-dawn cold that signals the night is ending. And in the sealed, climate-controlled rooms of the modern world, those signals never come. The body waits for a message that the environment no longer sends. But there's more. The sleep patterns observed in these communities were not uniform. They were not synchronized. Different individuals in the same group fell asleep at different times and woke at different times, creating a natural staggering of consciousness throughout the night. At almost any given hour of darkness, some portion of the group was awake, lightly alert, aware of the sounds beyond the fire's edge. Anthropologists studying these patterns have noted something striking. In a group of 20 to 50 people sleeping in close proximity, the probability that everyone would be simultaneously in deep sleep was remarkably low. Not because of formal watch duties, not because someone was assigned to guard, but because natural biological variation in sleep timing created a rotating, organic vigilance. Think about what this means. For most of human history, the night was not a time of universal unconsciousness. It was a time of staggered wakefulness, of some sleeping while others drifted in that light, alert state between deep rest and fuller awareness. The group, as a whole, was never entirely unguarded. The fire was never entirely unattended. The darkness was never entirely unwatched. This wasn't a scheduled system. It was biology doing what biology does, solving survival problems through variation rather than uniformity. The very diversity of human sleep timing, the fact that some people are naturally early risers and others naturally night owls, the fact that some people need 8 hours and others function well on 6. This variation that modern culture treats as a problem to be corrected may be one of the oldest adaptive features of the human species. We were not all supposed to sleep the same way. That was the design, not the failure. When you compare human sleep to the sleep of our closest primate relatives, something else becomes clear. Chimpanzees sleep between 10 and 17 hours, depending on age and circumstance. Gorillas can accumulate 12 to 14 hours. Most primates spend a substantial portion of their lives in sleep. Humans, by contrast, average somewhere between 6 and 8 hours, often less. We sleep significantly less than our evolutionary cousins, and yet we function at a cognitive level that far exceeds anything they achieve. The question is why? The leading theory involves a shift in sleeping location. Our ancestors, at some point in the deep past, moved from sleeping in trees to sleeping on the ground. In trees, you're relatively safe from ground-level predators, but uncomfortable, wedged into branches, unable to achieve the deep muscle relaxation that allows for genuinely restorative sleep. On the ground, especially once you have fire and a social group around you, you're more vulnerable to some threats, but capable of much deeper sleep. Natural selection, working over countless generations, appears to have favored efficiency. Sleep less, but sleep better. Get the neurological restoration you need in fewer hours. Spend more time awake, alert, capable of the complex social and cognitive activities that define human existence. Quality over quantity, depth over duration. This is the evolutionary bargain that shaped human sleep architecture, and it's why we are capable of functioning on 6 or 7 hours, while other primates would be cognitively wrecked by such deprivation. We were built for efficient sleep, not marathon sleep. And we were built for sleep that was flexible, seasonal, responsive to environment, varied across individuals and circumstances. The rigid, standardized, clock-governed 8-hour block is the anomaly. The variation is the original design. There is a particular kind of evidence that historians find in the most unexpected places, not in grand proclamations or official documents, but in the margins of things, in the passing references that appear in texts because they describe something so obvious, so universally understood, that no explanation was thought necessary. The way a medieval writer might mention going to the market without explaining what a market is, or reference a feast day without describing what feast days are. These offhand mentions, these unremarked assumptions, are windows into a world that took certain things for granted that we have entirely forgotten. They are the most honest documents in the archive, precisely because they were not trying to tell us anything. They were simply describing the world as it was. For 16 years, historian Roger Ekirch combed through diaries, court records, medical treatises, prayer books, and literature spanning roughly 1500 to 1800, collecting references to something that kept appearing in the documents of pre-industrial Europe. 2 phrases appearing in English, French, Italian, Latin, and other languages with a matter-of-fact regularity that suggested they were describing something everyone simply knew. First sleep, second sleep, not metaphors, not poetic expressions for different qualities of rest. Practical, functional references to 2 distinct periods of sleep, separated by a period of wakefulness in the middle of the night. Ekirch eventually collected over 500 documentary mentions of this pattern, and what emerged from that archive was a portrait of pre-industrial nights that looks almost nothing like ours. 500 references gathered across 16 years of patient reading, each one a small window into a world where the night had a shape that we have entirely lost. A world where waking at midnight was not a crisis but a threshold, where the darkness between the 2 sleeps was not empty but inhabited. People went to bed a few hours after dusk, not because they were lazy or had nothing to do, but because darkness was genuinely limiting. Without artificial light, the productive hours of the day ended at sunset. You could maintain a fire, carry a candle, but the kind of work or reading or social activity that required good light was simply over. So you slept. 3 or 4 hours of what the documents called first sleep, a period of deep, restorative unconsciousness that carried you from the exhaustion of the day's labor into the quiet middle of the night. And then you woke, not startled, not anxious, not reaching for remedies, just awake, naturally, gently, in the way that the body surfaces from deep sleep when it has taken what it needed and is ready for something else. The documents describe this waking as unremarkable, expected, simply the way the night worked. The interval that followed had a name, the watch, and people used it with a purposefulness that suggests they valued it, that they understood it as a distinct and meaningful portion of the night with its own character and its own appropriate activities. The most common activity during the watch was tending the fire. This was not optional, not a choice made by the particularly diligent. In winter, a fire left unattended for 8 hours would die, and relighting one from scratch in the pre-dawn cold was difficult, cold, and time-consuming. So you woke, you added fuel, you ensured the embers would carry through until morning. Practical, necessary, built into the rhythm of survival as naturally as eating or drinking. The watch was, in part, a biological adaptation to a technological requirement. The fire needed tending, the body woke to tend it. And in the space between sleeping and sleeping again, something else happened. But the watch was far more than fire maintenance. Prayer books from the period contain specific prayers intended for this hour, devotions structured around the assumption that the faithful would be awake and contemplative somewhere around midnight, in the still darkness between their 2 periods of sleep. Some texts explicitly instructed readers to use the time between sleeps for spiritual reflection, treating the watch as a natural opening for communion with the divine, a space when the world was quiet and the mind was clear, but not yet occupied by the demands of daylight. There is something striking about this, something that deserves to sit with you for a moment. The most intimate form of spiritual practice in pre-industrial Europe was not a Sunday morning ritual. It was a midnight one, conducted in darkness and silence. In the interval between the 2 halves of the night, the prayers written for the watch were not emergency prayers, not desperate petitions from people who could not sleep. They were the ordinary devotions of people who expected to be awake at midnight, who had always been awake at midnight, who had built their spiritual lives around the particular quality of consciousness that the watch provided. Medical texts from the same period recommended the watch for intimacy between partners. Physicians wrote that the interval after first sleep was when conception was most likely, when the body was rested but not sluggish, when desire was natural and strong. Some texts advise couples to time their intimacy specifically to the watch, treating it as common knowledge that this was the optimal window, not just for fertility, but for genuine connection. The darkness, the quiet, the particular quality of a mind that has already had several hours of sleep but has not yet re-entered the second sleep. These were understood as conditions that made the watch uniquely suited to closeness. The body, rested from first sleep, was not yet armoured with the vigilance of the waking day. It was open, soft, present in a way that the busy daylight hours rarely permitted. People also used the watch for thinking. Documents describe individuals lying awake in the interval between sleeps, turning over problems, composing letters in their minds, working through disputes or decisions that the busy daylight hours hadn't allowed space to consider. There is a quality of thought that belongs specifically to the middle of the night, a kind of loose, associative, unhurried cognition that feels different from daytime reasoning, less pressured, less linear, more willing to follow connections wherever they lead. Pre-industrial Europeans apparently knew this, apparently valued it, apparently organized their nights to include it deliberately. The watch was not an interruption of rest. It was a different kind of rest, a rest for the body while the mind moved freely through the darkness, unencumbered by obligation or urgency. Consider what this means for how we understand our own experience. When you wake at 2 in the morning and find yourself unable to return to sleep immediately, lying in the dark with your mind gently active, what is your first response? For most modern people, it is anxiety. Something is wrong. This is insomnia. The body is malfunctioning. You begin calculating how many hours of sleep remain if you fall back asleep right now, then right now, then right now. And each calculation makes the anxiety worse, and the anxiety makes sleep further away. The waking that was natural becomes a problem because we have been told it is a problem, because we have been given a standard against which our experience fails. But what if nothing is wrong? What if that waking is the oldest thing about you, older than language, older than fire, older than the first story anyone ever told? What if your body is doing exactly what bodies have always done? Surfacing from first sleep into the watch, ready for the particular quality of midnight consciousness, waiting for the second sleep that will carry you to morning. What if the problem is not the waking, but the story you were handed about what the waking means? I'm curious what you make of all this. Have you ever experienced that quiet midnight waking and felt underneath the anxiety something almost peaceful? Drop a comment and tell me what the middle of the night feels like for you. I read them, and this particular conversation feels worth having together. There is a researcher whose work sits at the intersection of history and neuroscience, whose findings arrived like a quiet confirmation of everything Eckerk had found in the archives. Thomas Ware, a psychiatrist at the National Institute of Mental Health, conducted an experiment in the early 1990s that deserves far more attention than it typically receives. He took a group of volunteers and gradually extended their period of darkness, eventually having them spend 14 hours a day in a dark room, approximating the conditions of a winter night before artificial light. Within a few weeks, something remarkable happened. The volunteers stopped sleeping in a single consolidated block. They began sleeping in 2 distinct periods, separated by 1 to 3 hours of quiet wakefulness. And during that waking interval, Ware measured their brain chemistry. He found elevated levels of prolactin, a hormone associated with the altered states of consciousness that accompany meditation and certain kinds of deep relaxation. The volunteers described their experience during the watch as a state of unusual calm, a kind of relaxed alertness that one participant called like floating, not anxious, not frustrated, simply present in a particular way that felt different from both sleep and ordinary wakefulness. What Ware had done, essentially, was remove the artificial light that had been suppressing the natural expression of human sleep architecture, and the architecture had reasserted itself. The body, given the environmental conditions it had been calibrated for over hundreds of thousands of years, returned to the pattern it had always known. 2 sleeps, a watch, the ancient design still intact beneath the modern overlay. It had not been lost, it had been waiting, suppressed by artificial light and industrial schedules, but present in the nervous system, ready to re-emerge the moment the conditions allowed. The architecture of the ancient night, dormant inside the bodies of modern people, surfacing quietly in a laboratory in Bethesda, Maryland, as though it had simply been waiting for permission. This is the detail that makes everything else click into place. The segmented sleep pattern is not a historical curiosity, not a cultural artifact, of pre-industrial Europe, not a practice that humans adopted and then abandoned when better options became available. It is, or at least it appears to be, the underlying biological architecture of human sleep, still present in the nervous system, still capable of expressing itself when given the right conditions. The 8-hour consolidated sleep is not the natural state that modernity disrupted. It may be the disruption itself. Now let's follow the thread of how that disruption happened, because the story of how the 8-hour sleep became the standard is not a story of scientific discovery or medical consensus. It is a story of economics, of industrial schedules, of the particular demands that a factory-based society makes on human bodies, and of the way those demands gradually reshaped not just behavior, but the very way people understood what was normal. Before the Industrial Revolution, time was not standardized. Different towns kept different local times, calibrated to the position of the sun as observed from that specific location. A clock in Bristol showed a different time than a clock in London, and this was not considered a problem because the activities that required coordination, market days, religious services, seasonal agricultural work were organized around local rhythms rather than universal schedules. Your body's relationship to time was primarily a relationship with the sun, with the seasons, with the cooling of the evening air and the warming of the morning light. Time was local. Time was biological. Time was the shadow moving across the sundial in the village square. The angle of light through the window in the afternoon, the particular color of the sky in the hour before sunset. It belonged to the place you were in and to the body you inhabited. The railways changed this. When trains began moving people and goods across distances that spanned multiple local times, the inconsistency became a practical problem. A train that departed London at 10 in the morning arrived in Bristol when Bristol's clocks said something different, and the resulting scheduling confusion was commercially intolerable. Railway time was introduced, a standardized system that imposed a single clock on an entire nation, and with it came something new in human experience. The idea that time was not local, not personal, not responsive to the particular conditions of where you were and what your body was doing, but universal, synchronized, the same for everyone. Time became a grid, and the body was expected to fit inside it. This was the beginning of the end for the watch. Factories required workers to arrive at specific times, to work in shifts of specific duration, to leave at specific times. The natural variation of human sleep patterns, the flexibility that had served our ancestors well for 300,000 years, became an industrial liability. A worker who woke at midnight for an hour of quiet reflection and then returned to second sleep might find it genuinely difficult to be alert and functional at 6 in the morning when the factory whistle blew. The watch, which had been a feature, became a bug. The biological diversity of sleep timing, which had kept the ancestral group safe through the night, became an inconvenience to be engineered out of the workforce. Synchronization was the industrial virtue. Variation was the industrial problem. Artificial light accelerated the transformation. Gaslighting, introduced in the early 19th century, and then electric lighting, spreading through the latter half of that century, pushed the productive evening hours later and later. When you can read, work, socialize, and conduct business by artificial light, The natural constraint that darkness had imposed on the evening disappeared. People began staying up later, compressing the time available for sleep, and the two-part night that had fit naturally into the long darkness of pre-industrial evenings no longer had room to express itself. The darkness that had been the container for the watch was gone, and with it, gradually, the watch itself. By the early 20th century, medical literature had begun to shift. References to first sleep and second sleep, which had been common in texts from earlier centuries, began to disappear. Sleep researchers and physicians increasingly described the 8-hour consolidated sleep as the norm, the standard, the goal. What had been one pattern among many, and arguably not even the most common pattern across human history, was elevated to the status of biological requirement. And anything that deviated from it, any waking in the night, any difficulty achieving the full unbroken block, became pathology, became insomnia, became a problem requiring treatment. The pharmaceutical industry was not slow to recognize the opportunity. Consider the quiet irony embedded in this history. The condition we call insomnia, the waking in the night that millions of people treat with medication, that generates enormous anxiety and medical consultation, and entire industries of sleep aids may in many cases not be a disorder at all. It may be the body attempting to express its natural architecture in an environment that has made that expression impossible. The watch trying to reassert itself in a world that has no room for it. The ancient rhythm pressing against the walls of the modern schedule, not because something has gone wrong, but because something very old is still trying to happen. This doesn't mean that all sleep difficulties are simply misunderstood biology. Sleep disorders are real. Sleep deprivation is genuinely harmful, and there are people whose sleep is disrupted in ways that cause genuine suffering and require genuine intervention. But it does mean that the baseline against which we measure those difficulties, the 8-hour consolidated block that we treat as the natural standard, may itself be a historical artifact, a relatively recent invention that we have mistaken for timeless truth. There is something almost tender about this realization. The person lying awake at 2 a.m, calculating the hours remaining, growing more anxious with each passing minute, may be experiencing something ancient and natural that has been reframed as failure. The body surfacing from first sleep, ready for the watch, finding instead a world of alarm clocks and morning obligations and the quiet terror of insufficient rest. The oldest rhythm in the human nervous system, meeting the newest demands of the industrial world, and being told it is broken. Let's move now into the part of this story that carries real weight, the part that moves from the philosophical to the concrete, from the historical curiosity to the body count. Because the war against natural sleep patterns didn't just create widespread anxiety and pharmaceutical dependency. It created disasters, specific, documented, preventable disasters that we can trace directly to the collision between human biology and the demands of a 24-hour industrial society. March 24th, 1989, just after midnight in the waters of Prince William Sound, Alaska. The Exxon Valdez, a supertanker carrying 53 million gallons of crude oil, strikes Bligh Reef. The third mate at the helm had been awake for 18 hours. The ship's captain was below, asleep, having reportedly been drinking earlier in the evening. Investigators concluded that fatigue was a direct contributing factor in the accident. 10.8 million gallons of crude oil poured into some of the most pristine marine waters on Earth. 1,300 miles of coastline were contaminated. Hundreds of thousands of seabirds died. Sea otters, harbour seals, orca whales, the entire ecosystem of Prince William Sound was devastated. The ecological damage persisted for decades. This is what sleep deprivation looks like when it intersects with industrial-scale responsibility. Not a groggy morning, not a foggy commute, but a catastrophe measured in wildlife and coastline and the slow poisoning of an ocean. The Exxon Valdez is the most famous example, but it is not alone. Chernobyl, April 26, 1986 at 1:23 in the morning. A nuclear reactor in Ukraine explodes during a safety test conducted by workers who had been awake for extended periods, operating on a schedule that had been shifted and reshifted in ways that disrupted their sleep patterns. The official investigation cited human error as a primary cause. The workers who made the critical decisions in those final minutes before the explosion were operating in the small hours of the morning, at the nadir of human alertness, after a shift that had extended far beyond what the body can sustain without cognitive impairment. The explosion released 400 times more radiation than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The immediate death toll was 31. The long-term toll, measured in cancer and illness across a wide region, runs into the tens of thousands. A city was abandoned. A landscape was rendered uninhabitable for generations. And at the center of it, human beings trying to think clearly in the hours when human thought is least reliable, on a schedule that treated biological need as an inconvenience to be overridden. The medical profession has its own accounting. Studies conducted over decades have documented the relationship between physician fatigue and medical error with a consistency that is difficult to look at without discomfort. Surgical residents working 30-hour shifts make significantly more serious errors than those working 16-hour shifts. The error rate in intensive care units is measurably higher in the small hours of the morning. Needle stick injuries, medication errors, diagnostic mistakes, the entire spectrum of medical error shows a clear relationship to the time of day and the duration of the shift. We have built a system that trains physicians through sleep deprivation, that treats the ability to function while exhausted as a professional virtue, and then expresses surprise when exhausted professionals make mistakes. The aviation industry has done more than most to reckon with this reality. Regulations governing pilot rest hours have been progressively tightened over decades, driven by accident investigations that repeatedly identified fatigue as a contributing factor. But the regulations are imperfect. The pressures to circumvent them are constant, and the accidents continue. A regional airline crash in upstate New York in 2009 killed 50 people. The National Transportation Safety Board found that both pilots had been awake for extended periods before the flight, that the captain had shown signs of fatigue during the approach, and that fatigue impaired performance was a contributing factor in the accident. These are not isolated incidents. They are data points in a pattern that emerges from the collision between human biology and the demands of a society organized around continuous operation, 24-hour schedules, and the economic pressure to keep systems running regardless of the biological costs to the humans who operate them. We built a world that never sleeps and then staffed it with creatures who must. The cost has been measured in oil spills and reactor cores and aircraft wreckage and medical errors, and the quiet, uncounted toll of the ordinary person driving home at the end of a double shift, fighting to keep their eyes open on a dark highway. The archive of sleep deprivation's consequences is vast and largely unread. Most of its entries are not dramatic enough to make the news. They are simply the small failures, the near misses, the diminished lives of people who have been chronically deprived of something their bodies need and told that the deprivation is normal. And yet, here is where the story becomes more complicated, more nuanced, more interesting than a simple narrative of biological truth versus industrial oppression. Because the science of sleep, as it has accumulated over the past several decades, does not simply confirm that more sleep is always better, that the body has a single correct requirement that modernity has violated. The relationship between sleep duration and health outcomes is, it turns out, a curve. And the shape of that curve is not what most people suspect. Large epidemiological studies, the kind that track tens of thousands of people over years or decades and correlate their sleep habits with their health outcomes, consistently find the same thing. People who sleep 7 hours a night tend to have better health outcomes than people who sleep either less or more. The relationship between sleep duration and mortality, the actual statistical relationship between how long you sleep and how long you live, is not a straight line where more is always better. It is a U-shape, or more precisely, a J-shape, where both extremes, both too little and too much, are associated with increased risk. People who regularly sleep less than 6 hours show elevated risks for cardiovascular disease, metabolic dysfunction, immune impairment, cognitive decline. This is well established and consistent across studies, but people who regularly sleep more than 9 hours also show elevated health risks. And this is the part that rarely makes it into the public conversation about sleep. The relationship is not simply that modern society is depriving us of sleep we need and we should all sleep more. It is that sleep duration, like most biological parameters, exists in a range, and the extremes of that range in either direction carry costs. The complication is that long sleep duration is often a symptom rather than a cause. People who sleep 9 or 10 hours a night may be doing so because of underlying illness, depression, or other conditions that both increase sleep need and independently affect health outcomes. Untangling cause and effect in these studies is genuinely difficult, and researchers are careful to note that the association between long sleep and poor outcomes does not necessarily mean that sleeping long causes those outcomes. It may simply mean that the same conditions that cause poor health also cause long sleep, but the picture that emerges, even with those caveats, is more interesting than the simple more is better story. It suggests that the human body does not have a single correct sleep requirement, that there is genuine individual variation in how much sleep different people need, and that the cultural pressure to achieve a specific number of hours, whether 6 or 8 or anything else, may itself be a source of anxiety that undermines the very sleep it is trying to promote. Consider the person who naturally sleeps 6.5 hours, wakes feeling rested and alert, functions well throughout the day, and has done so consistently for decades. That person, by the standards of most sleep hygiene advice, is sleep deprived. They are failing to achieve the recommended 8 hours. They may have been told by doctors or articles or well-meaning friends that they need to sleep more, that their apparent well-being is illusory, that the damage is accumulating even if they can't feel it. The anxiety this creates, the effort to stay in bed for 8 hours when the body is ready to wake after 6, the rumination about insufficient sleep, these may be causing more harm than the so-called sleep deficit they are trying to address. The research on sleep restriction and sleep extension suggests that the body is remarkably good at regulating its own needs when given the opportunity to do so. People who sleep without alarm clocks, who go to bed when they are tired and wake when they have had enough, tend to converge on sleep durations that match their individual biology rather than cultural prescription. The variation across individuals is real and significant. Some people genuinely need 8 hours to function optimally. Others genuinely function well on 6. The assumption that everyone needs the same amount is as biologically naive as the assumption that everyone needs the same number of calories. What the body needs is not a specific duration, but adequate depth, adequate cycling through the stages of sleep that perform different neurological functions. The slow-wave deep sleep that consolidates memories and repairs tissue. The REM sleep that processes emotional experience and supports creative cognition. The lighter stages that bridge the deeper ones. A sleep architecture that cycles through these stages appropriately is more important than the total number of hours, and that architecture can be achieved in different durations depending on the individual and the circumstances. This is where the ancient pattern begins to look less like a historical curiosity and more like a genuine alternative model. The segmented sleep of pre-industrial Europeans, the 2 periods of rest with the watch between them, was not simply a response to long winter nights or a cultural tradition with no biological basis. It may have been a pattern that allowed for a particular kind of sleep architecture, one that distributed the different stages of sleep across 2 distinct periods rather than consolidating them into one. And that included, in the interval between them, a state of consciousness that was neither ordinary wakefulness nor ordinary sleep, but something in between. Thomas Ware's prolactin findings are relevant here. The elevated prolactin levels he measured during the watch in subjects who had been allowed to return to a segmented sleep pattern under extended darkness conditions are associated with a state that meditators and contemplatives have described for centuries. A quiet, receptive, internally focused awareness that feels different from both the busy cognition of ordinary wakefulness and the unconsciousness of sleep. Some researchers have speculated that the watch may have provided a regular, built-in opportunity for this state, a kind of nightly meditation that modern consolidated sleep has eliminated. If this is correct, the implications are interesting. The epidemic of anxiety and rumination that characterizes contemporary life, the difficulty many people have accessing genuine stillness and quiet reflection, the widespread sense that the mind is always running, always processing, never truly at rest. These may be related, at least in part, to the loss of the watch. the nightly interval that pre-industrial humans used for prayer, for contemplation, for the loose associative thinking that the middle of the night uniquely permits. That interval has been compressed out of existence by the 8-hour model, and the psychological functions it served have been left without their natural container. This is speculative. The evidence is suggestive rather than conclusive, but it is the kind of speculation that deserves to sit with you, to be turned over in the quiet of your own mind, because it connects the historical and the biological to the deeply personal. The question is not just how did humans sleep in the past, but what did that sleep give them that ours does not, and whether what was lost is recoverable. Let's move into the cultural geography of sleep, because the segmented pattern is not only a historical phenomenon. It persists in modified forms, in cultures that maintained something of the pre-industrial relationship to time and rest. And the distribution of these practices across the globe tells us something important about the relationship between sleep architecture and environment, between biological need and cultural wisdom. The siesta, the midday rest practiced across Mediterranean Europe, Latin America, the Middle East, South Asia, and much of East Asia. Often dismissed as laziness by Northern European and American cultures that pride themselves on continuous productivity, it is in fact a remarkably well-adapted response to both biological and environmental reality. In hot climates, the hours between noon and 3 in the afternoon are often the most dangerous for physical labor, the most cognitively demanding for sustained attention, and the most uncomfortable for almost any activity. Working through them is not efficient. It is simply stubborn. The biphasic sleep pattern that incorporates a siesta, a shorter nighttime sleep followed by a midday rest of 45 minutes to 90 minutes, produces total sleep durations comparable to consolidated nighttime sleep, while distributing that sleep in a way that matches the body's natural alertness rhythms. Humans have 2 natural windows of increased sleep propensity in each 24-hour cycle, one in the early morning hours and one in the early afternoon. The siesta culture simply acknowledges the afternoon window rather than fighting it. The body dips towards sleep in the early afternoon not because of a heavy lunch or a lack of willpower, but because the circadian rhythm creates a genuine biological opening for rest at that hour. Every person who has ever struggled to stay alert in a warm room at 2 in the afternoon has felt this opening. Most cultures in the world's warmer regions decided, sensibly, to walk through it. Studies comparing populations that maintain siesta practices with those that have abandoned them, as many Mediterranean countries have done under economic pressure toward Northern European work schedules, find consistent patterns. The populations that maintain the siesta show lower rates of cardiovascular disease, better cognitive performance across the afternoon hours, and in some studies, lower all-cause mortality. When Greece underwent economic pressure in the early 2000s that led many workers to abandon the traditional midday rest, researchers documented a measurable increase in cardiovascular events in the affected population over the following years. This is not a small finding. It suggests that the cultural practice of midday rest was doing something biologically significant, something that the body misses when the practice is removed. The siesta is not a luxury or an indulgence. It is an adaptation, refined over centuries in environments where it was genuinely useful, and its abandonment under economic pressure is not progress. It is loss, the kind of quiet, undramatic loss that leaves no ruins and generates no headlines, but that accumulates in the bodies of the people who experience it, in the elevated cortisol and the strained hearts and the afternoon hours spent fighting a biology that simply wants to rest. The Japanese have a related practice called Inemuri, which translates roughly as sleeping while present. It refers to the practice of napping in public spaces, on trains, in offices, in meetings, in ways that would be considered deeply inappropriate in most Western professional contexts. In Japanese culture, Inemuri is not stigmatized. It is understood as evidence of hard work and dedication, a sign that the person has been working so diligently that they need to recover. A businessman asleep on a train is not a lazy person. He is a person who has earned his rest. This inversion of the Western attitude toward public sleep, where sleeping outside of bed is often seen as slovenly or undisciplined, reflects a fundamentally different relationship to the body's needs. The Japanese cultural framework acknowledges that sleep is not something that happens only in one designated place at one designated time, but a need that the body has throughout the day and that should be accommodated rather than suppressed. The result is a population that, despite working notoriously long hours, maintains sleep practices that are in some ways more aligned with biological reality than those of cultures that insist on the strict separation of sleep time and work time. There are also the night workers, the people who have always kept different hours than the majority, whose relationship to the standard sleep schedule has never been comfortable. Shift workers, night nurses, bakers, astronomers, the people who have always inhabited the night while the rest of the world slept. Their experience offers a different kind of evidence about the relationship between sleep timing and health. Shift workers, people who regularly work through the night and sleep during the day, show elevated rates of metabolic syndrome, cardiovascular disease, certain cancers, and mental health difficulties. The disruption of the circadian rhythm, the internal clock that regulates not just sleep but hormone production, immune function, cell repair, and dozens of other biological processes, carries measurable health costs. The body's systems are designed to operate in coordination with the light-dark cycle, and working against that cycle persistently takes a toll that is visible in population-level health data. But here too, the picture is complicated. Some individuals adapt to night work more easily than others, and the adaptation is not simply a matter of willpower or habit. There is genuine genetic variation in circadian timing, in what chronobiologists call chronotype, the natural tendency toward being a morning person or an evening person. Evening chronotypes, the people who naturally feel most alert later in the day and most tired later at night, adapt to night shift work more easily and show fewer health consequences than morning chronotypes forced into the same schedule. The mismatch between biological chronotype and social schedule, what researchers call social jet lag, is a source of chronic stress that has measurable health consequences independent of total sleep duration. The school start times debate in many countries is rooted in this biology. Adolescents undergo a genuine biological shift in circadian timing during puberty, a shift toward later sleep and wake times that is hormonally driven and not a matter of laziness or poor discipline. Requiring teenagers to be in school at 7:30 in the morning is requiring them to function at a time when their biology is still in the middle of what their bodies experience as night. The cognitive impairment this causes is real, documented, and has nothing to do with the student's effort or character. Schools that have moved their start times later have documented improvements in attendance, academic performance, and student well-being that are difficult to explain in any other way. We have built an entire society around a single sleep model, the 8-hour consolidated nighttime block, and then organized our institutions, our work schedules, our school systems, our transportation networks, our medical training programs, around the assumption that everyone can and should conform to that model. The cost of that assumption, paid in health, in safety, in cognitive performance, in the quiet suffering of the many people whose biology simply does not fit the standard, is enormous and largely invisible because we have naturalized it. We have decided that the model is correct and that the people who struggle with it are the problem. But the archive suggests otherwise. The archive suggests that the model is young, barely a century and a half old, built for economic convenience rather than biological truth, and that beneath it, still intact in the nervous system of every person who has ever lain awake at 2 in the morning wondering what is wrong with them, is a much older architecture. An architecture that includes the watch, that includes the quiet waking in the middle of the night, the lying in darkness with a gently active mind, the drift back into second sleep as the body decides it has had enough of the interval and is ready for more rest. There is a passage in a 16th century English household manual that Ekirch quotes in his research. It describes the proper management of a country house, the duties of servants, the rhythms of daily life, and in the middle of a discussion of nighttime routines, it mentions, as casually as it might mention the time to feed the animals or the proper way to store root vegetables, that the household would wake after first sleep to check the fire and attend to any other nighttime necessities, and then return to second sleep until morning. Not as an instruction, not as a recommendation, as a description of what obviously, naturally, simply happened, the way nights worked, the way they had always worked, the way they would continue to work until the factory whistle and the gas lamp and the railway timetable remade the world. That casualness is what moves something in the reading, the absence of explanation, the assumption that everyone knows. When a writer doesn't explain something, it means the thing is so ordinary, so universal, so taken for granted, that explanation would seem strange. First sleep and second sleep needed no more explanation in 1580 than breathing does today. They were simply the facts of human existence, as obvious as hunger, as unremarkable as thirst. And now we have forgotten them so completely that the historical documents that mention them seem strange to modern readers. Scholars encountering references to first sleep and second sleep in old texts sometimes initially assume they are metaphors, poetic expressions, references to different qualities of rest rather than different periods of it. The concept has become so foreign that even trained historians, trained to read historical documents on their own terms, sometimes miss what is sitting plainly in front of them. We have not just lost the practice, we have lost the ability to recognize it when we encounter the evidence. This is what happens when a way of life disappears, not through catastrophe, but through gradual replacement. The knowledge doesn't burn in a fire or drown in a flood. It simply becomes unnecessary, and unnecessary knowledge fades. The words remain in the documents, but the lived experience they described is gone. And without the experience, the words become opaque. The archive preserves the record, but the record requires someone who knows how to read it. Eckhart knew how to read it because he was looking for it, because he had noticed the pattern of references and followed it with the patience that good historical research requires. 16 years of looking, 500 references, a complete reconstruction of a lost architecture of the night, recovered from the margins of documents that had been sitting in archives for centuries, waiting for someone who would recognize what they were describing. There is something in that recovery that feels important beyond its historical content. The idea that what has been lost can be found. That the Arbon archive, however incomplete, however fragmented, however difficult to read, holds what was forgotten. That patient attention to the evidence can restore what time and economic pressure and cultural change have erased. That the truth about how we lived, about what our bodies knew and practiced for hundreds of thousands of years, is still there, still recoverable, still capable of speaking to us across the centuries. What other histories do you think are hiding in plain sight like this, buried in the margins of documents no one thought to read carefully? If there are forgotten truths about the body, about the way we lived, about what we've lost without knowing, we lost it, I'd genuinely like to hear what you suspect. Leave it in the comments. The archive benefits from more than one set of eyes. The watch is still there, in the nervous system, in the documents, in the experience of the person lying awake at 2 a.m, who is not broken, who is not suffering from a disorder, who is simply experiencing the most ancient thing about being human. The surfacing from first sleep into the quiet middle of the night, the body's invitation to be present in the darkness for a little while before the second sleep carries them to morning. What do you do with this knowledge? That is always the question that follows this kind of recovery. Not what does it mean in the abstract, but what does it mean for the person lying in the dark right now, listening to these words, perhaps in the middle of their own watch, perhaps wondering if the waking that brought them to this audio was a malfunction or a feature. The honest answer is that there is no single prescription, no universal correction to the sleep culture that modernity has built. The structures that created the 8-hour model are still very much in place. Alarm clocks are still set. Factories and offices and schools still open at fixed times. The economic and social pressures that standardize sleep are not going to dissolve because a historian found 500 references to first sleep in medieval documents. But there may be something in the understanding itself, in knowing that the waking is ancient, that the restlessness of the middle of the night is not pathology, but inheritance, in being able to lie in the darkness without the anxious calculation of remaining sleep hours, without the reaching for pills or the scrolling through the phone, and simply be in the watch for a while. To let the mind do what minds have always done in that interval, drift loosely through problems and memories, pray or reflect, or simply rest in the particular quality of midnight consciousness. To receive the watch as the gift it has always been, rather than the crisis it has been reframed as. The research suggests that the anxiety about nighttime waking is often more disruptive to sleep than the waking itself. People who wake in the night and lie calmly, without distress, without checking the clock, without calculating how tired they will be tomorrow, tend to return to sleep relatively easily. The waking is not the problem. The story we tell about the waking is the problem. And that story can be changed, or at least questioned, with the knowledge that what we are experiencing is not failure, but antiquity. There is also something to be said for the structural accommodations that some individuals and cultures have found. The nap, the deliberate, unapologetic, midday rest that the siesta cultures have maintained and that growing evidence suggests is biologically meaningful. Not every life permits a midday nap, and the economic structures that prevent it are real. But where it is possible, where the opportunity exists, the evidence suggests it is worth taking. Not as laziness, not as indulgence, as biology, as the body's acknowledgement of its own second window of sleep propensity, the afternoon dip that the 8-hour model ignores, but the body insists on feeling. The question of what the ancient sleep pattern means for modern people is ultimately a question about the relationship between biological truth and social structure, between what the body needs and what the world permits. That relationship has always been negotiated, always been imperfect, always involved compromises that cost something. The hunter-gatherer, sleeping on the ground in a group of 50 people, was making compromises with the demands of survival. The medieval farmer, waking at midnight to tend the fire, was making compromises with the demands of winter. The modern worker, setting an alarm for 6 in the morning, is making compromises with the demands of an industrial economy. The difference is that the modern compromise is often made in ignorance. The medieval farmer who woke for the watch knew what the watch was, valued it, used it. The modern person who lies awake at 2 in the morning often does not know that what they are experiencing is ancient, does not know that it has a name and a history and a biological basis, does not know that for most of human existence, it would have been met not with anxiety, but with quiet acceptance. The knowledge changes the experience, not completely, not magically, but meaningfully. To know that you are not broken is not a cure, but it is a beginning. And perhaps that is what the archive is for. Not to prescribe a return to some idealized, pre-industrial sleep pattern that is in any case impossible to fully recover. Not to argue that modernity is simply wrong and the past was simply right, because neither is true, but to restore the context that makes experience intelligible. To give people the knowledge that their bodies are not malfunctioning when they wake in the night, that their difficulty conforming to the 8-hour standard is not weakness or disorder, that the variation they experience is ancient and human and real. The body knows things that the culture has forgotten. The nervous system carries knowledge that the calendar has erased. The watch still wants to happen, still asserts itself in the small hours, still offers its particular quality of consciousness to anyone who will receive it without panic. 300,000 years of sleep architecture does not disappear in 150 years of factory schedules. It goes underground. It waits. It surfaces in the 2 in the morning, waking that you have been taught to treat as a problem. Maybe it is not a problem. Maybe it is the oldest thing about you, surfacing in the dark, reminding you that you are an animal with a history much longer than the industrial age, that your body was shaped by forces far older than alarm clocks, that the night has an architecture that was designed for you long before the world decided it knew better. The clay tablets of ancient Mesopotamia, the oldest written records we have, contain no instructions for how to sleep. Sleep was too obvious to require instruction. It was simply what bodies did when the sun went down, in whatever pattern the body found natural, in whatever rhythm the environment and the season and the social group permitted. The complexity we have added to that simplicity, the prescriptions and measurements and disorders and treatments, is a measure of how far we have traveled from the biological reality that shaped us. Consider the irony of that distance. We are the most medically sophisticated civilization in human history, and we are the first civilization in human history to have made sleep into a problem requiring expertise and intervention. Every previous generation of human beings simply slept. They did not optimize their sleep. They did not track their sleep stages on an app or consult a specialist about their sleep hygiene or take a pill to achieve the sleep duration their culture prescribed. They lay down when they were tired, in the darkness that the night provided, in the company of the people around them, and they slept in whatever way their bodies found natural. And their bodies found the watch, found the two sleeps, found the ancient architecture that we have spent a century and a half trying to replace with something tidier. And yet here we are, still waking in the night, still lying in the darkness, with minds that are gently active, that want to think and drift and be present in the quiet, still experiencing something that the medieval prayer books had specific prayers for, that the physicians of the Renaissance had specific medical advice about, that the hunter-gatherers of the deep past built their social sleep patterns around. The watch persists. The body remembers what the culture has forgotten. There is something quietly hopeful in that persistence. The biological truth is more durable than the cultural story. The nervous system outlasts the factory schedule. 300,000 years of sleep architecture is not erased by 150 years of industrial time. It is compressed, suppressed, pathologized, but not eliminated. It waits in the dark, patient as the archive, ready to reassert itself whenever the conditions allow. And perhaps that is the final thing to carry from this exploration. Not a prescription for how to sleep, not a rejection of the modern world and its demands, but a quality of attention to what the body knows, a willingness to listen to the ancient intelligence that wakes you in the night and offers you the watch, to receive it without anxiety, to inhabit it without panic, to let it be what it has always been, a brief interval of darkness and quiet, and the particular kind of thinking that only the middle of the night permits. The night is not the enemy of rest. It never was. For most of human history, the night was a companion, a container, a space with its own architecture and its own gifts. The darkness that pressed against the windows of the medieval farmhouse was not threatening. It was simply the night, doing what the night does, holding the two sleeps and the watch between them, offering the firekeeper and the prayer sayer and the quiet thinker a few hours that belong to no one but them. You are lying somewhere in the dark right now, perhaps. Maybe it is very late where you are, or very early. Maybe you woke a little while ago and found this, reaching for something to fill the quiet hours. Maybe you are settling in for the night, feeling the weight of the day beginning to lift. Wherever you are in the arc of your own night, whatever brought you to this particular moment of listening, the darkness around you is the same darkness that has always surrounded sleeping humans. the same darkness that held the Hadza by their fires in Tanzania, the same darkness that fell over medieval England and its two-part nights, the same darkness that has been the companion of human sleep for 300,000 years. In that darkness, the archive is still open. The files are still there, the records of how we lived before the factory whistle and the alarm clock and the prescription sleep aid, before we were taught to be anxious about the night, before we were told that waking in the dark was a malfunction rather than a feature. The records are there, in the court documents and the prayer books and the medical treatises and the wrist monitors of researchers watching people sleep by firelight. The records are there, and they say the same thing in every language, in every century, in every culture that has been allowed to develop its relationship to sleep without industrial interference. The night has always had two parts, and the space between them has always been yours. Let the first sleep carry you down. Let the darkness hold you. And if you wake somewhere in the middle of the night, if you find yourself quietly alert in the small hours, if the watch asserts itself as it has always done, as it has done for every human who has ever lived, let it lie still. Let the mind drift. Let the darkness be what it is. The second sleep will come when it come, as it always has, as it always will. The body knows the way. If this is one of those nights where sleep is taking its time returning, consider letting this play again from the beginning. The layers tend to reveal themselves differently with each listen, especially in the quiet. And if someone you know has been lying awake, wondering what is wrong with them, send this to them, not as advice, but as company. There is something worth preserving in the idea that a person on the other side of the world might hear these same words tonight and feel for the first time that their body is not broken. That kind of quiet connection across the dark is its own form of keeping the archive alive. The archive is closed for tonight. The files are back in their folders, the dust settling back over the shelves. But the knowledge remains, carried now in you, in the quiet understanding that the night is not something to be conquered or optimized or corrected. It is something to be inhabited with the same patience and the same trust that your ancestors brought to it for 300,000 years before someone told them they were doing it wrong. Sleep well, both times. The same impulse that buried the two-sleep pattern also buried other histories we were never meant to question. Beneath the Sphinx at Giza, there are chambers and passages that Egyptian authorities have restricted access to for decades, and the reasons given have never quite satisfied the researchers who keep asking. That story is in the archive too, and it is waiting for you.